Pandora Syndrome. Written by April Walleen. Read by April Walleen. Directed and recorded by Andreas Gallego. Chapter 4. Jack Todd. I lay in the great bed at Remy's mansion. The fireplace against the far wall cast deep shadows around the room, shadows that seemed to reach out as if to touch me, but stayed just shy of my body. They whispered words I couldn't quite hear, but I knew their meaning. A warning. I reached out, searching for Remy, but there was no one. Panicked, I left the bed and headed for the door. I had to find him. I was desperate. Halfway across the room, I caught a flash of amber. There, in the dark mirror of the vanity, two shining amber eyes glinted wildly at me, drawing me to them. They were my own. I stepped closer and examined them in horror. I looked like death. My skin was ghastly pale and my face was gaunt. I stepped back in shock when strong arms suddenly wrapped around me. I gazed back in the mirror. It was Remy in all his handsome glory. His lips softly ran the length of my neck and my knees weakened. All I wanted was to sink back into him, to become one with him. But that wasn't right. I already was one with him. Not being with him was what felt wrong. I shouldn't have left him. Had I left him? I stared into the mirror as I relished in his embrace. It was then that something else in our reflection caught my eyes. A red dot just above my heart marred the long white lace robe I wore. The dot grew and grew until the fabric turned a deep scarlet. I blinked, and suddenly I was wearing the horrible outfit Rosetta had picked out for my birthday. My hair was a mess, my clothing ripped, my eyes deeply shadowed as blood flowed from the gaping bullet hole in my chest. Remy smiled, and in an instant fangs sprung from behind his teeth. "We are one," he sighed. His grip was tight, primal, and he sunk his fangs into my neck. I woke up face to face with the R2-D2 pillow my brother had given me the previous Christmas. Startled, I chucked the plush novelty droid across the room. Blood pumped hard in my veins as I sat up, trying to get a grip on reality. I was in my room, but how had I gotten there? Had Jack brought me in from the lawn? Guess I'd have to thank him for not leaving me out there. I looked to the Star Wars clock on my nightstand. 6 o'clock. Well, that was helpful. Was it 6 a.m. or 6 p.m.? I think it was p.m. I had an odd feeling that the sun was going down. In fact, I was sure that it was. Why, I didn't know. In a sudden panic, I looked down at my chest, worried I'd find a puckered gunshot wound. There was nothing but smooth flesh. Thank God for small favors. However, that didn't change the fact that I seemed to have been sucked into some weird vampire romance novel. I looked around. Remy wasn't there, yet my body ached with a strange longing for him. Was he looking for me? Would he be mad when he found me? What was I thinking? Of course he would. I'd left him in a pile of pissed-off vampire and dead guy freezer boxes. I rubbed my face in worry. No, I couldn't focus on him now. I was safe at home with my brother, and I had to convince myself that was enough, or I really would go mad. I looked around my barely unpacked room. It felt alien and bare. I'd only moved in a few weeks before my birthday celebration and had been lazy about unpacking. Normally, my walls would be covered with posters and movie memorabilia. Now, all I had up were my favorite Billy Idol and Evil Dead posters. Everything else lay in boxes or sprawled across the room. I should do something about it, but my head was pounding in an unsettling way. I pushed back the covers and froze as I saw the long, soft material covering my legs. I was still wearing the robe that Remy had put me in. Groaning, I slowly got to my feet. I could handle this. That was when the pain hit and soreness clenched my innards, claiming my whole body. I gripped the bedsheets, trying to brace myself. My stomach growled and my mouth went dry as pangs of hunger roared through me. Barely managing to get a grip on myself, I straightened, and then rushed out of my room, down the narrow hallway, into Jack's little kitchen. I flung the fridge open. It slammed against the counter so hard it nearly took the door off its hinges. My stomach lurched as I searched the shabby contents of my brother's icebox. There was nothing but condiments and pizza boxes. I hauled a box out of the fridge, threw it on the counter, and began scarfing down a thick slice of cold pepperoni and cheese. I was halfway through it when the consistency began to change. The texture evaporated as it melted into paste on my tongue. I tried to swallow, but it stuck in my throat. Quickly, I ran to the sink and gulped it down with water. My stomach felt as though it were turning inside out. I searched the house for something edible and found ramen. Stupid bachelor pad. Desperate, I began boiling water, ready to cook the stale noodles. I was like some starved beast, rabid with hunger. Running my hands through my hair in irritation, I waited for the water to boil. After a few minutes, I realized I was actually tearing out loose hairs in my mindless desire to eat. It felt like hours before the noodles were finally soft enough to consume. So what if they were a little al dente? I dumped the seasoning packet on the ramen, stirred, and began shoveling noodles into my mouth with little care for manners or that I was eating from still boiling water. It registered on some level that I was burning my mouth, lips, and tongue, but the pain was nothing compared to the hunger. Happily, the noodle soup went down better than the pizza. The pain in my throat from the scalding soup soon subsided, but the ramen still hadn't satisfied my hunger. In a sudden fit of anger, I threw the pot across the room. What was I going to do? Just then, the front door opened. I rushed out of the kitchen to discover Jack holding a bag of groceries. I was across the room in a movement so fast that even I barely registered it. "Jesus!" Jack yelled as I yanked the bag from his grip and proceeded to rip through its contents. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he shouted, but I was too busy attempting to eat a carrot. Chew as I might, I swallowed, only to have the same result as the pizza. Stubbornly, I choked back the chunks of vegetable. Then, I grabbed a soda, opened it, and chugged, trying to wash down the food. "You trying to scare me to death, Dora?" Jack yelled. Somehow, I knew he wasn't just talking about me destroying his groceries. "Where the hell have you been? I called Mom." That got my attention. "You did what?" I hissed back in panic, thinking of the terrible lecture I would get the next time I saw her. "I had to," he yelled. "You disappeared. I get that you're pissed. I left you at a club, and I'm sorry. I'm a horrible brother. But you don't disappear for days and then show up passed out on the front lawn dressed in a fancy old nightgown." I was about to retaliate when the significant information caught up with me. I was gone for days? He couldn't have said days, as in more than one. "What's today?" "Tuesday. What the hell does that matter?" I rushed to the TV, turned it on, and started searching madly through the channels. "Hey, don't run off when I'm yelling at you," Jack scolded. "Drop dead," I hollered back, ignoring him. Quickly, I channel surfed until I found the news. A balding former all-star smiled back at me as he rattled off, "Atlanta snaps an 11-game losing streak with a 6-5 win over Padres." Blah, blah, blah. Where was the date? Then finally, the little white letters marching across the bottom of the screen read, Tuesday, 8/17/82. I'd lost 4 days. I grabbed my head, trying to force the logical part of my brain to give me an answer. "What is wrong with you?" Jack asked, finally starting to sound more concerned than upset. He crouched next to me, looking big brotherly and worried, when I caught a strange but familiar metallic scent. Instantly, my stomach twisted, shooting an electric surge up my spine. The sweet smell made me salivate. Jack placed a hand on my shoulder. Instinctively and without control, I turned on him, my lips drawing back from my teeth. I couldn't help it. I couldn't stop it. I felt like I was watching myself from outside, or being puppeteered by some sadistic force I couldn't see. I tried to hold myself back, but I knew I wouldn't be able to for long. The strings were too tight. "Dora?" he called, looking at me in horror. "What the hell is wrong with your eyes?" With what control I could muster, I glanced at the wall mirror and was shocked to see my eyes lit with that bright amber hue I'd seen before. I felt something bulging at the roof of my mouth then. There were 2 slits behind my canines. Before I could examine any further, my jaw spasmed, my mouth opened, and 2 long, thin teeth folded down. The word vampire echoed through my mind, and I knew what would happen. Jack stared at me wide-eyed. "I think you need to see a doctor." "Jack!" I struggled to say through the low predatory sound rising from my throat. "Run!" I hissed, but it was too late. My poor brother just stood there like the quizzical academic he was. I leapt, unable to stop myself, bowling him over and landing on his chest. There was a loud crack as his sternum fractured beneath me. He screamed only a moment before I had my fangs deep in his neck. Waves of pure relief flowed through me as I blindly drained my brother of his life's blood. I lay on the living room floor feeling recharged. My head had cleared. I felt sated. The taste of sweet iron lingered in my mouth. I sat up, stretched, and wondered why the hell I'd been acting so crazy. I felt fine now. Jack was right. I needed to see a doctor. I wiped something wet from my lips then. Looking down at my fingers, I was horrified to find them covered in blood. In sudden realization, I shot to my feet. "Jack!" I screeched. There, on the floor, amongst a slew of groceries haphazardly strewn across the room, lay my poor dead brother. "Don't be dead, Jack. Don't be dead," I chanted as I scrambled over to him. He was pale, his eyes wide and lifeless. "Be alive," I pleaded as I went to check his pulse. I immediately froze in horror. On his neck was the gaping red wound where I'd torn his throat out. I recoiled in shock and ran from the house. I didn't make it far. In my panic, I tripped and went tumbling to the ground. There, on my knees in the front yard, I cried. This couldn't be happening. Needing to be rid of the blood on my mouth and hands, I frantically wiped them on my flouncy nightgown. Stunned, I looked down at the bloody pattern I'd made with Jack's blood. No, this was a nightmare. It had to be a nightmare. I tried to imagine Jack alive, walking around in the house, ready to be all pissed at me again for disappearing. Everything I'd ever read about the supernatural begged me to recognize what had happened, what was causing me to act like a starved animal gorging itself on blood. I clenched and unclenched my fists at the thought. "Hold it together, Dee," I coached myself. I needed help. I contemplated knocking on the neighbor's door, but what would I tell them? "Excuse me, but an unfathomable hunger overcame me, causing me to accidentally attack my own brother. Can you help me?" Remy's face popped in my mind then. I longed to see him, for him to comfort and hold me while I sobbed on his shoulder. I shook my head at that. No. Was I crazy? He was the one who had turned me into some bloodlusting demon. I looked up and down the dark street, hoping some brilliant plan would come to mind. There were hardly any street lamps in the neighborhood, but I could see everything, clearly to the end of each street and beyond. A broken sprinkler jerked, spitting little gouts of water several blocks away. I could feel which way the wind was blowing like never before, and I could smell the flowers budding in the neighbors' yards. All my senses seemed to have sharpened while I'd slept. I'd have to call the police and find a way to explain how and why my brother had been drained of all his blood. Suddenly, I heard a car backfire in the distance, and my heart leapt. It was the familiar sound of Rosetta's car. The sound was soon followed by the telltale squealing of her brakes, the rolling thump of her engine, and I thought for a moment I could smell the oil leak she always complained about. A few minutes later, her car pulled up to the house. Thank God. Rosetta was always the take charge sort of girl. She would know what to do. Quick as a flash, literally, I was at the driver's side door of her dark blue Escort. Rosetta shrieked in surprise as I practically pressed my face to her driver's side window. "Rosetta, I can't tell you how good," I tried to say, but she quickly pushed her door open, hitting me with it as she exited the car. "You've got some nerve, Pandora Todd," she yelled, slamming the door behind her, effectively stunning me into silence. "We all thought you were dead," she screamed, marching towards my brother's duplex. I scrambled after her. "But Rose!" "Don't," she continued. "Just don't. Your mom made me promise to stay in this hellish city until we found you. You've been gone for days. Days!" she shouted furiously. "Then I get a call from Jack telling me he found you passed out this morning wearing some old-timey thing like you'd been living in some kind of freaky cult." She eyed the nightgown I still wore. "I'm sorry?" I asked in confusion. She sneered at me. "I spent the better part of my day today canceling the missing persons report we filed. I can't believe I had to take off work because you ran off with some guy." "But I didn't," I protested. "That's not what happened. Then what did happen to you? You don't look dead," Rosetta hissed and placed her hand on the doorknob of my brother's apartment. Quickly, I pulled her away, a bit harder than I meant to. Rosetta flew back about a foot before catching herself. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she screeched, rubbing her arm. "Sorry," I quickly apologized, marveling at my own strength. I remembered the incident with Remy and the freezers then, guessing my senses weren't the only thing that had changed. In that moment, Rosetta got past me and was back at the door. "Just wait," I insisted. "Why should I?" she scowled. Because, I stammered, hoping something brilliant would come to mind. Nothing did. So I took a deep breath and ran it all together. "I might have accidentally killed Jack by drinking his blood, and I might be a vampire, and that's what happened. At least I think it is. And I really, really, really need your help." Smooth. Rosetta stared at me blankly. Finally, her lips pursed. "Hilarious." she hissed and walked through the front door. So damn funny. Oh no. I quickly followed her inside. What the hell happened in here? I closed my eyes and tried to think of a way to explain my brother's body on the floor. What's going on? A familiar voice called then, and my eyes shot open. I looked up, shocked to see Jack staring at us in confusion. You guys need a maid, that's what's going on, Rosetta replied, stepping over the mess of groceries in the doorway. Jack! I shrieked, stunned and yet ecstatic to see him up and about. I must have looked something like Wile E. Coyote before the boulder hit. Jack stood fit as a fiddle. I rushed over to him in relief, crushing him in a bear hug. When I pulled back, he was looking at me like I was insane. I grabbed his head and turned it this way and that, looking for any wound on his neck. Nothing. It was like I'd imagined the whole thing, leaving me to question the state of my own sanity. What's your deal? He huffed, pushing me away. Nothing. Your sister is just insane, Rosetta answered for me and headed for the fridge. Well, at least I had backup for the insanity plea. Rosetta dismissed me with a roll of her eyes. Got any food? She called before sticking her head in the fridge. I sighed a little. Anything with bread and marinara sauce was always a good way to calm Rosetta down, and if she was hungry, maybe she wasn't as mad as she seemed. I definitely didn't want any pizza, but I didn't miss the deliberate snub as she handed Jack a slice and ignored me altogether. Jack took a bite, chewed it a few times, and then screwed up his face. Gugh! He choked, and then went to spit it out in the sink. My heart raced. I think something's wrong with the pizza. Blasphemy, Rosetta replied, grabbing the rest of his slice and taking a bite. Then again, I'm starving. Running around LA for days looking for your former best friend does that to a person, she said, sending me a scathing glare. I was too busy staring at Jack wide-eyed to take offense. If food wasn't agreeing with him, did that mean he was, turning into something like me? Explanation now, Rosetta said then, getting in my face. A reasonable goddamn explanation. The truth hadn't worked, and I wasn't a very good liar. I glanced up at Jack then for help. God knows why. He just shrugged apathetically. It was then that I had a sudden and sickening vision of Jack getting hungry and tearing Rosetta apart, limb from limb. I couldn't risk that. She had to go. I can't talk right now, I told her with as much force as I could muster. I didn't miss the flash of anger and hurt in her eye. I felt like a proper ass, but she didn't move. I looked back at Jack worriedly. He was smacking his lips. Whether it was from hunger or just trying to get the taste of pizza out of his mouth, I didn't know, but I wasn't going to wait to find out. I turned back to Rosetta, ready to bodily hustle her out when she suddenly headed toward the door. I'll go, Rosetta spat. Now that the princess is back, I have to drive all the way back to San Diego and make up for the days I took off work to conduct her search party, she said, and walked haughtily out of the house. I followed my best friend to her car, tears threatening to form in my eyes. I didn't want her to go. I wanted nothing more than for her to stay, but I could not let what happened to Jack happen to her. I want my earrings back, she said as she got into her car, revved the engine at me, and backed down the driveway. Hope he was worth it, she yelled as she pulled into the street. The emotional shrapnel hit me hard. I stood there, my heart hurting. I thought of shouting after her, of begging her to come back so I could try and explain, but it was better this way. Safer. I told myself I could try and fix things with her after I figured out what horrible thing I'd gotten Jack and I into. I trudged back into the condo and shut the door behind me. I felt like someone had just kicked my puppy, whereas my brother, still leaning against the kitchen counter, just shook his head at me with smug disapproval. That was awesome, he said flatly. Don't start, he nodded. Okay, but game over. Where did you disappear to? He asked. It's not like you. He crossed his arms. Talk. I shook my head and then narrowed my eyes at him. There was something different. Earlier, Jack had been wearing a blue shirt with a crippled stick figure on it that read, I do all my own stunts. Now he was wearing one of his green soccer jerseys. You changed your shirt. I spilled something on it. Stop dodging. I blinked at him. Where is it? He blinked right back. Dora. You don't remember? I asked, trying to keep my temper. For God's sake, who cares, Dora? There was blood on it, wasn't there? I told him seriously. Blood? He repeated in confusion. I felt my lip curl into a sneer. Yes, blood, damn it. I think I killed you. His eyes widened as he looked at me like I was insane. The hell? Think hard, I insisted. Jack! I don't remember! He yelled at me with wide eyes. I stood silent for a moment. I'm hungry, he finally muttered. Fear blanketed me. Damn it, I swore. I knew what had to be done, just not how to do it. I tried to suppress the image of me walking through the front door with a bloody corpse for us to gnaw on. Okay, just hold on, I said, speaking slowly like one might to a rabid dog. Suddenly, Jack growled. His eyes clamped shut, and he clenched his waist. My stomach! Oh, God, it hurts! Jack looked up at me, and I saw a deranged red gleam in his eyes. My brother was fading. I'd been right to get Rosetta away from us. I leapt to his side, keeping him upright. His pain radiated from him in waves. Oh, God, I breathed. What have I done to you? His head flailed around, exposing a pair of jagged holes in the side of his throat. Had I somehow missed them before, or had they just reappeared? I didn't know, but I couldn't contemplate that right now. I had a serious lack of vampire food problem to deal with. I guided Jack to the couch and somehow, amidst his writhing, got him flopped down onto it. His body thrashed, out of control. I felt pathetic, helpless. What could I do? I began pacing the room, trying to get my brain to work. Whatever we had become, Jack needed blood, which meant someone had to die. That thought turned my stomach unpleasantly. I couldn't just cross the street and strangle a neighbor. I may have killed Jack, but it was an accident. I couldn't purposely murder someone. Other possibilities cycled through my mind. Blood banks. Didn't they have mobile trucks that collected donations? I'd have to rob it. I started to panic, my hands clenching and unclenching. I shook. How the hell was I going to pull this off? Dora, calm yourself. A cool, familiar voice suddenly called from behind me. I spun around and there was Remy, sitting thoughtfully on the edge of Jack's favorite recliner. My heart leapt in excitement, but my mind reeled in anger. My mind won out. This is your fault, I whispered hatefully. Remy looked deep in thought. In some ways, perhaps, yes, he replied, looking at Jack with a contemplative frown. Perhaps, you bastard. It occurred to me then that his presence here was probably not a good thing. You just stay away from us. My fingers curled in anger. I was ready to defend Jack if I had to. Remy just shook his head. I am not here to harm you, either of you. I remembered then how much power and speed he'd had chasing me through his home. It was time for fight or flight. I chose flight. Quickly, I grabbed my brother and hauled him toward the back door, which wasn't easy considering his current state. I nearly had my hand to the doorknob when Remy was suddenly there in front of me. I all but landed right in his arms. He held me with one arm as his cool blue eyes bore into mine. Stay away from me, I raged and broke his grip. I ran toward the living room, my brother groaning in protest as I pulled him along. I hoped that my now considerable enhancements would help us get away, but Remy appeared in front of me again. This time I was able to stop a reasonable distance away. We need to discuss some things, he said. Please, this would be so much more comfortable if we sat and talked like civilized vampires, he said, and then smiled, as if to be comforting. I staggered back a step, nearly dropping Jack's hand. It was one thing to accept that vampires were real, or that I'd even met one, or speculate that I'd become something else. It was another thing to have someone call me the word. Like a flaming brand, the word vampire etched itself in my brain. I swallowed my fear and weighed my options. Running was clearly out of the question, especially with Jack in his current condition. I could fight Remy. I could leap at his throat and... No, it was futile. Remy moved like lightning. Though the situation seemed hopeless, I decided to go with some good old-fashioned blustering. You're going to help Jack, I insisted. He's my brother. Help him or leave. Remy only sat back down on the edge of the recliner. He's in pain, I hissed impatiently through gritted teeth. Remy smiled sadly and a wave of euphoria hit me. I beat it back as I realized that something about Remy's presence was definitely affecting me, trying to calm me. I held onto my cynicism like a shield. Jack managed a few garbled words then. Dora, it aches. So hungry. I turned a glare worthy of Rosetta on Remy. Swear to me he won't die. That word is a little short-sighted, but after we speak, yes, I will help your brother. I know what he needs." I looked Remy over, wondering if he carried a flask of dead guy juice on him. It seemed unlikely. Beneath his pea coat, he wore a simple gray Oxford shirt and slacks, nothing to suggest a bulging pocket full of blood bags. His eyes looked tired. They were a darker blue than I remembered. Gone were the swagger, the sexy stare, and the commanding presence. He looked decidedly more human now, and maybe even a little scared. I shook off my sympathy for the bloodsucker before I became too fond of him, and took a moment to consider his offer. I mean, what else was I going to do? Jack needed my help, and Remy was the only one I knew that might help. Carefully, I sat on the edge of the couch and laid a hand on my brother's ankle, though it did little to soothe him. "Start talking," I told Remy, echoing Jack's words from earlier. Remy nodded. "The other night, shortly after we met, someone shot you." I just rolled my eyes. "I know, I was there." Somewhere along the way, my hard-won denial of the shooting incident had been lost, and now I just wanted to make Jack better. Remy smiled a little. "Of course, but the wound was massive. With little effort, I might have actually touched your heart." I laid a hand in my own chest and swallowed, trying not to imagine my own exposed organs. "I did everything I could to keep you breathing." "Jesus, couldn't you just get me to a hospital?" I asked, sounding more than a little ungrateful. "You were beyond the help of modern medicine," he replied. "A large caliber rifle round on the chest will do that." His breath caught at that, but he went on. "While you were in my charge, I could not let you come to harm. In my business, it does not do to break a promise." There was something in his words that sounded old, permanent. "So, I went with the only option I had. As your lifeblood ran down my fingers, I made the decision. I took your blood and then asked you to accept mine. You agreed, and so I made you into one of my kind." I digested that. It lined up with what little I knew of vampire lore. I imagined it, my bleeding out in the streetlight with Remy's shadow laying over me like a villain in a film noir. His words penetrated the strange vision then. He'd said my kind. Was I really a bloodsucker now? Remy grinned a bit. "Yes, a bloodsucker." I blinked, suddenly embarrassed, but I hadn't said the words out loud. I looked at him with narrowed eyes. "You read minds?" I asked hesitantly. He frowned a bit. "Force of habit. Apologies." I felt a little violated at that. It was intrusive. Wrong. Can I do that? I'm afraid the talent is unique to me. Suddenly I remembered a random piece of vampire lore. "How did you get in here?" I blurted at Remy. "The front door was unlocked," he replied playfully. I glared. "I didn't invite you in here. Vampires can't enter a place uninvited." He seemed amused and one side of his mouth quirked upward. "Rubbish," he said with a little laugh. "But go on. What else might you think you know?" I looked down at my feet as images came to mind. Garlic, silver, crosses. I thought of what I had around the house. Not much. I packed Grandma's old silver cross and the "leave your grandmother's jewelry where it is. None of that will work," he interrupted, waving a hand. "What else has your culture taught you? Have you read much? The classics?" he asked, sitting forward in interest. "This is helpful." Before I could ream him for intruding in my head again, Jack's groans became a snarl, and then a howl of pain. His eyes looked painfully bloodshot. The red gleam in them was nothing short of horrific. His skin looked sallow, and a greenish liquid was starting to pool at the corners of his mouth. What was happening to my poor brother? Worry replaced my outrage. "You can do something for him, right?" Remy frowned sadly over at Jack. "My apologies, I thought we had more time." He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. His face then turned to the mess of groceries on the floor. When Remy reopened his eyes, he stood and walked toward the door. He was leaving? "Where are you going?" I asked in surprise. He stopped and knelt amongst the grocery Armageddon. "Patience is a virtue, Pandora," he replied. "Dora," I corrected tartly. He gave me a little smirk, zeroed in on a pack of hamburger patties, and held them up before me. "This is what he needs." "Ground round?" I asked, eyeing the package dubiously. Remy just raised a hand for me to be patient as he crossed the room to Jack. I was going to kill the man. I didn't care how handsome he was. Remy opened the package, removed half of it, and held it out before my brother. There was a manic look in Jack's eyes. Carefully, Remy held the raw meat a little closer. Immediately, Jack wrenched the hamburger from Remy's hands, snatching it away like a starved beast. He almost had it to his mouth before he seemed to come to himself, staring down at the raw meat in a moment of hesitant realization. "Eat," Remy insisted. Jack looked back at the grisly ground cow. His stomach growled audibly then, and all hesitation seemed to vanish. With ravenous bites, Jack stuffed the raw hamburger into his mouth, choking it down as big globs of meat dripped down his chin. "That is so unsanitary," I muttered as pieces of discarded half-frozen meat hit the floor. I continued watching in abject horror as Jack wolfed down the ground beef, but I was astounded. Halfway through the pack of raw burgers, Jack began to look better. With every bite, the red in his eyes lessened, until they eventually returned to their normal color. His grayish skin grew peach, and his face was no longer gaunt. His eyes were wide as he looked up at me, meat still hanging from his mouth. "More," he growled. "Impressive," Remy muttered, handing Jack the rest of the hamburger package, and then looked at me squarely. "I don't believe this," I sighed in disbelief. There was a hint of pity in Remy's eye, and I knew I was not going to like whatever he was about to say. "I am told denial is a normal reaction, but your reality has changed. The rules of your existence are different now. You are no longer mortal. Your movements are silent, your strength incredible, your senses comparable to a hunting cat, and you will move with the quickness of a snake," he told me as though absently making a grocery list. "You've likely already noticed some of these alterations." I remembered sprinting through Hollywood, my ability to see for what seemed like miles, how I'd cracked bones in Jack's body when I pounced on him. I nodded dejectedly. "Not all of the legends are true, but 2 immutable facts remain," he continued, his voice taking on a deadly import. "Sunlight is your enemy, and fresh blood is your new source of sustenance. This is who you are now." "Who we are," I corrected, looking over at my brother. He was still eating, but slowly, more thoughtfully. Remy shook his head. "No, I am afraid that your brother is something different." I blinked in confusion. "What?" Remy shook his head. "Admittedly, this is my first time creating a tyro, a scion. What you are is no surprise, but this," he said, gesturing to Jack, "is something new entirely. I feared that you might attack someone before I could find you, but this is something extraordinary." I sat down on the recliner. The world seemed to stop turning as I struggled to pull my thoughts together. "All of this because a couple of cheap gangsters came after my non-existent wallet," I muttered in despair. Remy sat down on the edge of the couch beside Jack. For a moment, the only sound came from my brother, his flared nostrils and meat-filled mouth making wet, slurping sounds. "No," Remy said. "The gangsters were just a distraction. There was a sniper from the roof above us. I'd been told to watch you for a reason. You were not mugged. You were murdered." The absurdity of his words shocked me, and I chuckled despite myself. "So, you're telling me you have a third shooter theory?" He cocked his head in confusion and then got the reference. "Ah, yes, Kennedy. I see the comparison." He frowned a little. "He was a good man." "You knew Kennedy?" I asked flatly. "That is neither here nor there," Remy replied dismissively and laid a comforting hand on my knee. It was warm and I have to admit, nice, even in my current state of distress. I let it sit there. "I am sorry for what has happened to you, Pandora, for the burden you now carry. I thought about leaving you to your own devices, but your killer could strike again, so I came to offer you a way to protect yourself." He looked down at my hands. "To teach you how to use the weapons I have given you, and the ones you came by naturally, to defend yourself against whoever tried to end your life." There was sympathy in Remy's eyes, and honesty in his voice. I had questions, too many questions. He was so close I could smell his cologne, see the hardness of his well-defined jaw. His blue-gray gaze eyed my lips. I had a maddening urge to kiss him, when something he had said brought me back to myself. "Who told you to watch me?" He shook his head. "Unfortunately, I cannot say. I am compelled by my promise." I thought to press him, then decided against it. He was telling the truth. I could feel it somehow, and I knew that no amount of urging on my part would change that. I looked into his eyes. "Who tried to kill me?" I asked him. Remy shrugged. "I do not know, but we will find them." Several minutes passed as the 3 of us sat in the living room saying nothing. I did my best to process all that Remy had said, and decided not to argue against the reality in front of me. "Tell me about Jack," I asked, pointing at my brother. "What is he, if he's not like us. Open your mouth, please, Remy instructed Jack. My brother gave him a confused look and then reluctantly obeyed. Remy leaned over to him and carefully pulled down Jack's bottom lip, revealing his back lower teeth. I stared in awe. Jack's back teeth were nothing close to human. They'd become pointed and sharpened, like a dog's. Amidst the flecks of raw burger clinging to them, I could see they were coated in that thin greenish slime I'd seen pooling at the sides of his mouth earlier. By the gods, Remy breathed. Forgive me, I have not seen one of these in a very long time. By the gods, I scoffed. Who says that? Hey man, Jack groaned. Knock it off. He growled and snapped at Remy's fingers, his teeth clacking together just shy of them. Jack! I exclaimed. I'm sorry, Jack shuddered. Don't know what's wrong with me. Incredible. Pandora, what you have done has never been achieved by another vampire, Remy told me then, his voice curious. Stop calling me Pandora, I said, staring at my brother as he shivered on the couch. I took a long breath to calm myself. I attacked him and drank his blood. He lived, but he's not a vampire? I asked Remy, trying to get a grip on the situation. What happened was a natural inclination. There was nothing you could have done about it. It's what tyros do. You wake, ready to feed, but you did not give him your blood. No, I replied. That thought hadn't even occurred to me. There are a lot of words for what your brother is. Vampire is not one of them. Zombie, Jack suddenly finished, staring at his meat-stained hands. Remy nodded. That word seems to fit the symptoms, but his attitude and control are all wrong. He turned towards me then. Vampires make ghouls by attacking a person and then feeding them a small amount of their blood to compel them to do their bidding. Now, the undead, or zombies, are monsters that are risen from death. They have no free will of their own, no mind. They are but vessels for their master's will. However, Jack does not need your command to respond to us. He is dead, and yet he is a particularly strong-willed, independent, and oddly personable member of the undead. It sounded like a gothic fantasy, some fiction, not reality, but I knew it was true. So I killed him, but he didn't stay dead? I asked Remy. That is correct. I knew it! I shouted, reeling on my brother. I told you I killed you! I told you! Geez, you want a cookie? Jack coughed, wiping meat from his lips. Sorry, I didn't believe you, what with my breathing and walking and everything. Zombie wasn't exactly the first thing that came to mind. But wait, this can't be right, I reasoned. Jack looks like he always has. No hint of zombie about him anymore. I put a couple fingers to Jack's neck, trying not to think about how easily I'd found his pulse. His heart is beating just fine, I added by way of proof of Jack's non-zombiness. I looked at Remy in confusion, as if this were the first confusing thing this evening. So, vampires can make zombies as well as ghouls? No, I am afraid that talent is unique to you, Remy replied. My gift may just have increased your natural abilities. I snorted at the word gift, but then suddenly thought of Grandma and my issue with graveyards. In one fell swoop, the realization dawned on me, hitting like a ton of bricks. It was a good thing I was already sitting down. Corpses react to me, I muttered, trying to make sense of it all. Like Grandma. Jack's eyes grew wide. And that time you had a conversation with Grandpa after his heart attack, Jack added. I stared at him a moment before the splinter of memory came back to me. You think Devil Girl was just a cute nickname Grandma picked out for you? Jack asked. You don't remember. Actually, I did remember. Well, some of it anyway. I always knew something weird had happened, but I could never remember what. Now I remembered the vague impression of talking with Grandpa and people screaming at me, but that was about it. Though, to be fair, I was having a pretty rough couple of days. Someone with a sniper rifle had shot me, I'd been turned into a vampire, and I'd accidentally killed my own brother. I'd become a monster of legend, and I'd made my brother a monster, which was somehow thanks to my weird issue with the dead. So if vampires don't make zombies, I asked Remy, how did I make Jack? It is a skill honed by a select few called necromancers, Remy replied. Necro what? I asked intelligently. Those with the ability to control the dead, he clarified. It is a magic that your new vampiric gifts seem to have increased substantially. Well, how did I end up with control over the dead? It is usually either studied or passed down in one's bloodline. Well, I definitely didn't study it. Remy smiled a little. You would appear to be in the latter and more rarefied category then. But there aren't any necro-whatevers in my family. Besides, wouldn't Mom or Jack have some symptoms of dead person speak? Necromancers, Remy clarified for me again. Not necessarily. The gift could skip siblings, or even generations. All right, so now that we know Jack's a zombie and that I'm super extra weird, what's next? You come to live with me, Remy replied simply. My eyes widened. Did you miss the part where we just met a couple days ago? I'm not moving in with you. Remy sighed. You need guidance, or you could be killed. Killed again, you mean? I asked with a raised brow, but Remy did not find me funny. I will not have you harmed by whomever is hunting you or the groups that govern our laws. I wanted to ask about that last part, but Remy just continued on. No more running away, Pandora. You must learn about your new state, and I must be the one to teach you. Why does that mean I have to move in with you? I asked as sterile images of trying to hang up my posters in Remy's mausoleum of a home came to mind. I shuddered. I'm not agreeing to be your pet vampire. It is dangerous for you to be left on your own, Remy insisted, looking meaningfully to Jack. I deflated. He was right. Jack had been killed and brought back because I couldn't control myself. What if I lost it again, or started doing weird necro things? By helping Jack, Remy had earned my trust to some degree. And yet, I had a hard time accepting that he was right, that everything for me would now be different, and that I was dangerous if left to my own devices. Someone had tried to kill me. If they tracked me here, Jack could be in danger too. I needed to figure all this out, and to do that, I needed help. Remy's help. Fine, I'll stay with you, I sighed. But only until I figure out this necro-vampire stuff. Jackson, Remy called, turning to my brother then. You will be fine as long as you keep fed. Do not allow yourself to become hungry. Wait, why does Jack get a free pass? He's just as new to all this as I am. Because he can act human. You felt his pulse, didn't you? Yeah. He moves, breathes, and acts human. For the most part, he can pass with little effort. There's no allure for him to feed on humans unless he gets hungry, and there's no other food source available. A situation he can easily avoid. Right, Jackson? Have you seen me eat? He asked. No problem there. I had to admit, he had a point. Jack already ate every chance he got. He hated being hungry. A raw meat-only diet wouldn't be too much of a change. I will keep an eye on him to make sure he does not get into trouble, though, he assured me. You, my tyro, require much more effort. I just pouted. It is settled then, Remy told us and stood to leave. A sudden rush of disappointed flooded me. Something in me was sad that he was leaving, and I almost got up to stop him. I groaned at myself. Even in the face of supernatural craziness, Remy still had a profound effect on me. I mean, now that I didn't want to kill the bastard, I could appreciate how incredible he looked in his tailored clothes. Where are you going? I asked, trying not to sound too eager. To prepare our way. There is much to do, Remy replied, and went to the door. I yearned to go with him then and there, but forced my feet to stay put. Remy paused at the door then and looked back at me. I will come for you tomorrow night, and we will begin your training. You, he said to Jack, finish your dinner and play nice with your sister. I smiled a little, the levity breaking the tension in the room. What if he's not nice to me? I asked. Remy opened the door, letting in a few shafts of moonlight. The reason you can speak with the dead is your talent with necromancy, your control over them. What does that mean? I asked. It means that Jack is under your power. Good night, my tyro. He smirked at me with that devastating smile and left, shutting the door silently behind him. Jack and I stood frozen for a moment before what Remy told me sank in. I turned slowly towards Jack and smiled. He glared back at me, seeming to sense my intention. Dora, don't you dare, he warned. Stand on one foot, I told him experimentally. Jack immediately stood up and lifted his leg off the floor, staggering some. I felt a rush of energy thrum through me. Oh, this is too good, I exclaimed. Dora, Jack warned. I laughed and then instructed him to put his leg back down. He actually laughed, shaking the stiffness from his leg. That's insane. I couldn't move it at all, he chuckled. Yeah? I asked him. Yeah, he replied, and then seemed to think a moment. No, actually, it's more like I didn't want to move it. Weird. Try something else. Really? I asked, just to be sure. I was all for testing this out, but I didn't want to actually hurt Jack. Jack nodded and I shook my head, trying to think of something else. Raise your right hand." Almost immediately, Jack raised his arm. He looked up at it and laughed. "That's crazy," he encouraged as he looked at his arm. I silently commanded him to put his arm down, and he did. This was madness, and yet somehow we loved it. For a moment, it almost seemed like things would be all right. My mortal life had always been a confusing jumble. My work, my social life, none of it had ever made sense to me. I'd never seemed to belong. Now, using this weird power of mine, everything felt oddly right. I looked at the door where Remy had left. I would be spending a lot of time with him, and I wasn't sure how I felt about that. Though I was strangely at peace, there was still a looming uncertainty about my future that I felt deeply. Seeming to once again interpret my mood, Jack took a few steps and wrapped his arms around me. I embraced him back. My brother. My family. "We'll get through this together," he told me. "It all sort of feels like it's going to be okay, doesn't it?" I nodded and then looked up at him. "Jack?" I asked. "Yeah, sis?" I smiled impishly. "Do an Irish jig,"